Hey, it's Mike here, and today I want to address some questions like, do I cherry pick studies? And are vegans wrong because they cherry pick studies? And just some basic stuff about cherry picking, and probably too much about cherry picking in this video, but let's go. Cherry picking is, of course, choosing that piece of evidence that supports your argument and ignoring any information to the contrary, a bit like picking particular cherries off of a tree. Now, cherry picking is generally considered a logical fallacy, sometimes referred to as the fallacy of incomplete information. We'll get more to that in a bit. But it seems like cherry picking has become the go-to response to anybody citing a study in an argument. Like, to cite a study is a fallacy, and since I cite a lot of studies, I end up getting a lot of comments like these. Breaking news! You're an idiot. You cherry-picked because areas of Italy average at 95 years old, so their life expectancy would be like 200. Or the science just doesn't support veganism no matter how much they want to twist and cherry-pick the data. And Anna Spears saying the link between meat and cancer is almost non-existent. Tell that to the WHO. And of course, that vegans cherry-pick. And my all-time favorite, you cherry-picked, quote, you suck really, really hard, and what you do hinders humanity's progress. And even beyond my comment section, the general sort of drift that I get is that if you don't agree with someone, they are wrong because they cherry pick, and I feel like it's gone too far. And moving on, you may have noticed that I rarely, if ever, accuse people of cherry picking. That's because in many cases, saying you are a cherry picker is just saying that you are arguing one side, that you are picking points that support your argument, and that is redundant. But yes, one-sidedness is considered an informal fallacy that is associated with cherry picking. But this is where I would have to argue that neither cherry picking nor one-sided arguments are by definition always a fallacy. Let's look to the definition of a logical fallacy, which I'm probably cherry picking. No, it was the first one that I found. Quote, a logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that renders an argument invalid. An argument isn't by definition invalid because only one side is presented. Let's say I'm arguing that gravity exists and I only choose examples of why it exists. I don't argue for the other side of why it doesn't exist. I don't say, but what about bubbles? My argument would not be invalid. Gravity would still exist. You see what I'm saying? See, otherwise I could render any belief invalid just by arguing one side of it. Maybe I should argue that meat is healthy and just present one side, and therefore the belief that meat is healthy will be completely invalid forever. Something tells me the same people will not be criticizing me for cherry picking on that one. And like, imagine all of this in the court of law. The judge being like, Mr. Lawyer, since you only presented arguments on your client's side and did not argue for the other side, even though your arguments were all technically correct, your client is hereby guilty as charged. In contrast, an appeal to nature fallacy actually would invalidate an argument because just because it happens in nature doesn't mean that it is ethically right, for example. Just because a lion does it doesn't mean that you can. Otherwise, rape, murder, infanticide, and cannibalism would all be A-okay. Okay, moving on, let's look closer to the cherry-picking analogy with this hypothetical situation of a cherry tree that has 5 cherries. Imagine that cherry 1 through 4 are egg board-funded industries saying that eggs are healthy, and cherry number 5 is an independent study associating atherosclerotic buildups with egg consumption. So we're looking at a lot of rotten cherries, and we have to ask the question, is it better to not pick those rotten cherries, or should I be picking those rotten cherries and presenting them in an effort to appear unbiased? Just like how in real life, when you approach a cherry tree, you don't also eat all of the rotten cherries, dang it! I'm so unbiased. But the reality is that we live in a world of one-sided arguments, so you have to decide whose argument is actually more sound and what their motivations are. For example, do they have an evil vegan agenda where they want to save animals and help the environment and people get healthy? Or is it coming from somebody who just really wants to keep eating bacon, or the animal agriculture industry or industry in general? So yes, you can pinpoint any of those one-sided arguments as less persuasive, but I just don't think that having a one-sided argument is a compelling accusation or enough to render an argument completely invalid. But there are tactics like misrepresenting information within a cherry-picking situation that definitely renders an argument invalid. So let's take a look at that from this paper on the subject. In the case of ex-Fox News host Bill O'Reilly's attempt to argue that the Bush administration deserved credit for lowering the poverty rate, O'Reilly said, quote, "The only fair comparison is halfway through Clinton's term, halfway through Bush's term. The reality is that you can see by this chart, he was claiming that someone who decreased poverty rates 7 years in a row was outperformed by someone who increased poverty every year in office. A complete misuse of the data to draw an opposite conclusion from reality. Conversely, if I mention that a study showed that vegans have lower levels of cholesterol, is that misrepresenting the data, the general trend? Absolutely not. Across the board, vegans have lower levels of cholesterol than meat eaters in the US, in the UK, all the way over to Brazil. In fact, I don't think there is a single study that demonstrates that meat eaters have a lower level of cholesterol than vegans. If you find it, I'll pay you $10. So the cholesterol example, definitely not misrepresenting data, but if you ever do think I am misrepresenting data, absolutely feel free to let me know, specify the point and the study. Now I want to move on to what I think is the most important point in this video, and that is that my videos in general are responding to a societal one-sided argument. When I'm arguing vegan health points, I am arguing in direct response to the notion that vegan diets are unhealthy. Now, this other side is beaten into us on a daily basis, and therefore I don't feel a need to also argue for that side. And furthermore, that I'm not responding to this notion with a few select studies about how vegan diets are healthier. No, there is research that is sweeping across the board that health states of vegans are generally better. It's lower cancer, lower mortality rates, lower heart disease, lower BMI, absurdly lower diabetes risk, lower hypertension, and again, that lower cholesterol. And this is what encouraged me to go vegan in the first place, from a point of bias in the complete opposite direction. Okay, so all of this is vegan versus non-vegan conflict. Let's talk about vegan versus vegan conflict, which brings me to my oil video in which quite a few people did accuse me of cherry picking. Firstly, yes, that was a one-sided argument in response to the one-sided argument that we constantly get that oil is a health food. We are constantly exposed to that notion. And if you did have a problem with my cherry picking in that video, then ask yourself, did you also have a problem with the completely one-sided argument of articles like this that just rattle off benefits of coconut oil, for example? Probably not, and that's because you want oil to be healthy. I would love for oil to be healthy. It would be so much easier to just say, you can go vegan, eat all of the oily mock meats and fried food that you want, and you will be perfectly healthy. And this is where this conversation about cherry picking sort of intersects with a conversation about ethics. I do not feel that it's ethical to tell people that, for example, coconut oil is healthy when there are studies taking people who are on a standard American diet approaching the cholesterol ceiling and it still raises their LDL. I feel that it would be unethical for me to also sell the positive points of coconut oil because that right there is so negative that nothing could be positive enough. And furthermore, this is a bit of a touchy point, but I think it is very disingenuous to pretend to be unbiased. Imagine if I was like, meat causes cancer, but it has many health attributes like protein. That is super icky, and I think at the root of why so many vegans fervently oppose Unnatural Vegan, because she will go out of her way to actually argue against the ethics of veganism, presumably her own ethics, to seem unbiased to meat eaters and hopefully persuade them. And people really don't like when people aren't authentic. It's just bad taste in your mouth. To wrap up the subject of the oil video, I will probably do a follow-up video at some point to clarify things, but I do hope that everybody understands that it is not logical to determine that oil is a health food because some dude only presented facts on why it's not healthy. Okay, now I want to get a little creative and just go ahead and make up my own logical fallacy, and that is the cherry picker accusation fallacy. And that is how determining that your opposition's argument is invalid simply because they presented a single point of evidence or a one-sided view is itself a fallacy. Presenting a single point or a single side does not, by definition, make that argument wrong, like I demonstrated with the gravity analogy. If I say gravity is real because things drop, that doesn't mean that gravity is fake news because I only used one point. Similarly, a vegan diet isn't just wrong because somebody presented one positive thing about it. And zooming out, what I see most of the time when people are using the term cherry picker against me and other vegans is that they are simply looking for a method of denial. They are looking for a way out so they can completely deny the argument, no matter how many studies or how scientifically valid it is. So the term cherry picker is often a vehicle of denial so that you can continue paying people to kill animals for you, all the while under an umbrella of your own fallacies such as appeal to nature, appeal to history, appeal to nirvana with those humane farms, and the list goes on. All of which are totally sound logic. Like this comment where someone accuses me of cherry picking and immediately pivots to an appeal to nature fallacy. Unbelievable. First convince animals in the wild to give up killing others for their food to live. Then come back if you are successful. Okay, at this point, I just want to emphasize that I absolutely do encourage people to look at different viewpoints, hear different one-sided arguments, and definitely be aware of people who are faking being unbiased and, make sure you navigate around that. But to summarize, an argument isn't by definition wrong because it is one-sided. Cherry picking is often a vehicle of denial for people to just ignore any scientific evidence. And my final point, definitely put the same level of scrutiny into your own argument that you're putting into other people's arguments. Okay, rant over. Let me know your thoughts though in the description. Should vegans be required to say good and bad things about their arguments, like meat causes cancer, but meat also has iron? Would that be more persuasive? Also, do you agree with my view on cherry picking? If not, let me know down below why not, and just be aware that you're probably cherry picking for your answer. Kidding. Final note, I want to do a live streamed video at some point, so let me know what time would be best for you, maybe weekends or weekday nights, whichever one. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.